40 years old. I want to say that before I say anything else, because 40 deserves to be said directly, without the complicated relationship women are supposed to have with it. I am 40 years old. I have been sitting at this table, in this corner, with this coffee, since I was 32. 8 years of Mondays. 8 years of Tuesdays. 8 years of Manny's particular brand of honest light and honest coffee, and Rita's particular brand of knowing when to refill and when to leave well enough alone. 8 years is a long time to be alive inside, and a short time to describe. But that's not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about 1955. Because 1955 is, and I say this as someone who has now lived inside enough years to compare them with authority, 1955 is the year that the future arrived, and nobody sent a formal notification. You just looked up one morning, and it was there. Louder than you expected, shinier than you planned for, with more chrome on the outside and more fear on the inside than any brochure about the post-war American dream would have you believe. Sit with me for a while. I have things to tell you about this year. I need to begin with the cars, because the cars are impossible to ignore, and if I don't address them immediately, they will simply sit there in the background of everything else I say, enormous and chrome-plated and faintly absurd, demanding acknowledgement. The cars of 1955 are a statement, not a subtle statement, not a considered, carefully worded, open to interpretation statement. A statement in the register of shouting, of declaration, of someone standing in the middle of the room at a party and saying what they've been holding since they walked in. The statement is, we survived. We survived the Depression and the war and the rationing and the casualty lists and the telegrams arriving at houses on Tuesday afternoons. And we are still here. And we are going to express our survival in the largest, most chrome-covered, most aggressively finned piece of machinery that American engineering has ever produced. And we are going to drive it down the main street of every city in this country at a speed that announces, we are not afraid anymore. They are enormous. I want to be precise about the scale because precision matters here. The Cadillac Eldorado of 1955 is not a car in the sense that my understanding of car was formed in 1947. It is closer, proportionally, to a small ocean liner. It has tail fins, actual fins like a fish or like a rocket, as though the engineers couldn't decide whether the vehicle was meant for water or space and resolved the disagreement by committing to both aesthetics simultaneously. It is available in colors that did not previously exist in the vocabulary of transportation: turquoise mist, Cascades coral, Sherwood green. These are colors named by someone who was either a poet or had been awake for 3 days straight, and I find the ambiguity charming. The chrome. The chrome catches the light of every surface it passes and throws it back at you like an argument. I walked down Fifth Avenue on a Tuesday morning last month, and the reflection of my own face returned to me from 17 different cars before I reached the corner. There is something simultaneously magnificent and deeply peculiar about a society that has decided its primary mode of transportation should function as a mirror. I do not drive. I have never driven. Thomas drives. He has a 1952 Ford, dark blue, which he tends to with the affection an architect gives to well-made objects, with the specific care of someone who respects function as the highest form of beauty. We use it for trips out of the city, for visits to his family in Connecticut, for the particular New York luxury of leaving New York temporarily and thereby remembering why you returned. In the city, I walk. I take the subway. I take the bus when the walk is too long and the subway too crowded. I navigate this city the way I have navigated it since 1929, when I was 14 years old, and my mother first let me take the IRT alone to visit my cousin in the Bronx. But I noticed the cars. I noticed the cars the way you notice a very loud person at a party. Not because you want to engage with them, but because they make engagement with anyone else slightly more effortful. And I think, when I see them gleaming in the morning light on Fifth Avenue, that there is something true in their excess. That the American impulse to make things bigger and more chrome-covered than strictly necessary is not mere vulgarity. It is, underneath the vulgarity, a genuine expression of relief. These people were hungry during the Depression. These people were afraid during the war. Now they have money and they have peace, at least for this specific moment, in this specific place, for this specific slice of the population that has access to what money and peace provide. They are buying large cars because they can, and there is something in that simple fact that I find not beautiful, but human. Entirely, recognizably human. Which is not to say that tail fins are aesthetically defensible. They are not. But they are comprehensible. And comprehension is more useful than judgment. I want to stop talking about cars for a moment. We'll come back to them. Because something happened this summer that is more important than any automobile ever built. And it happened quietly enough that I'm not sure everyone understands yet what it means. Jonas Salk's polio vaccine. I know that sounds clinical. I know the phrase Jonas Salk's polio vaccine is one that gets announced and then absorbed and then filed in the category of good news and moved past. I want to try to explain why that is the wrong response. I want to try to explain what it actually means to be alive in 1955 and to see what I have seen this summer. When I was a child, and I say this to anyone listening who has grown up in a world where the word polio is historical rather than personal. When I was a child, summer was the season of fear. Not an abstract fear, not the kind of fear that lives in the back of the mind and occasionally surfaces when you read the wrong article late at night. A specific, present, ongoing, daily fear that every parent of a young child carried through June, July, and August, with the resigned continuity of someone carrying a bag that is too heavy to put down. Polio came in summer. It came through contaminated water, through contact, through proximity to infected persons, and no one fully understood the mechanism, which meant that no prevention was reliable. You kept children away from public pools. You kept them away from crowded places. You watched for the signs: fever, headache, stiffness in the neck. And you prayed, if you were a praying person. And you worried in a more secular register if you weren't. It paralyzed children. Not as a metaphor, literally. It attacked the nervous system, and it left children unable to walk, unable to breathe without the iron lung, unable to do the specific things children are designed by every evolutionary and biological process to do, which is move, grow, run, live. In 1952, 3 years ago, there were nearly 58,000 cases of polio in the United States. Nearly 3,000 people died. Thousands were paralyzed. In the summer of 1955, after the vaccine was announced and distributed, the numbers begin to collapse. I have been watching this happen in real time, and I am here to tell you that it does not feel like what I expected it to feel like. I expected relief to feel like joy. In fact, it feels quieter than joy. It feels like putting down the bag that was too heavy. It feels like the specific exhale of someone who has been holding their breath for so long that the exhale itself is strange, slightly dizzy, slightly disorienting. Not unpleasant, but unfamiliar. Mothers who were carrying that weight through every summer of their children's childhood are putting it down now. Children will grow up not carrying it at all. They will never know what it was to fear a public pool the way those mothers feared it. They will think of summer as the season of freedom, not the season of vigilance. They will take this freedom for granted in the way that all of us take for granted the protections we never knew we needed. I think about the future children, the ones who will never lie awake worrying about something that doesn't exist anymore. That invisibility, the invisibility of the thing that was erased, is the most profound gift that medicine can give. Not the cure itself, the cure that becomes so complete that the next generation cannot even imagine needing it. Jonas Salk was asked if he would patent the vaccine. He said, "Could you patent the sun?" I've been thinking about that sentence since I read it. I think I will be thinking about it for the rest of my life. I'm going to tell you something that is going to sound like a small anecdote and is actually the beginning of a revolution. And I know that I won't be believed when I say that, and I'm going to say it anyway. I heard Elvis Presley for the first time on the radio in January of this year. I was in the kitchen. I was making tea, the specific kind of tea making that happens at 10 o'clock in the evening after a long day. The tea that is less about tea and more about the ritual of concluding. Thomas was reading in the next room. The radio was on at the volume I use for company rather than listening. Present, undemanding. And then this voice came out of it. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because I have been a professional observer of human performance for 20 years, and I have certain standards for the vocabulary I use to describe what a voice does. I will not say it was beautiful, because beautiful is too simple. I will not say it was talented, because talented is too reductive. What I will say is this. The voice was doing something I had not heard before. Not something technically unprecedented. The constituent elements were all legible, all traceable. There was rhythm and blues in it. There was country music in it. The specific Appalachian cadence that I recognized from recordings I'd heard over the years. There was gospel in it. Not the polished, composed gospel of a choir, but the rougher, more urgent gospel of someone for whom the music is not performance, but necessity. But the combination was, and I say this as someone who spent 20 years studying how combinations work, how the elements of a performance interact to produce something that is more than their sum. The combination was genuinely new. It was the sound of something becoming itself in real time, not yet fully formed, not yet certain of what it was, but absolutely certain that it was something. I turned off the stove. I walked to the doorway between the kitchen and the hallway, where the radio signal was clearest, and I stood there for the remaining 3 minutes of the song. Thomas looked up from his book. I said, "Do you hear that?" He listened for a moment. He said, "What is it?" I said, "I don't know yet." That is the truest thing I can say about Elvis Presley in January 1955. I did not know yet. I am still, if I'm honest, in the process of knowing. But I recognized, standing in that doorway with my cold tea forgotten on the counter, that I was hearing something that was going to matter. The jazz musicians I have loved all my life, the ones whose music I've described as the thing that makes the hair on your arms stand up, they played with a sophistication that required you to bring something to the music, required you to listen actively, to meet the sound halfway. This required nothing. This arrived. And I think that is not a diminishment. I think that is a different kind of power. The power of something that needs no translation, no cultivation, no prior vocabulary. The power of something that speaks directly to the body before it speaks to the mind. I am 40 years old, and I have been around long enough to know that I should be suspicious of things that speak directly to the body before they speak to the mind. I am also 40 years old and have been around long enough to know that music which lasts always has both, the body and the mind, in some proportion, in some conversation with each other. I don't know yet what proportion this will turn out to be. I'm watching. I told you in 1947 about the Kozlowskis' television. The box. The screen the size of a legal pad. The gray and slightly less gray image. The sound of Milton Berle seemingly occupying their living room on Tuesday evenings, and the neighbors knowing when the Kozlowskis had guests because the sound carried through the walls. I told you I was watching. 8 years later, I can tell you what I was watching become. In 1955, there is a television in approximately 2/3 of American homes. That number is going up every month.
The screens are larger. Not large by any standard that will eventually develop, but significantly larger than the Kozlowskis' box.
The images are sharper. The programming has expanded from a few hours in the evening to something approaching an all-day presence in the lives of people who have set the television up as the organizing furniture of their living room, which is what most people have done. The television is where people now watch the news. This is the change that interests me most, as someone who spent years writing about culture for a newspaper and spent 2 years on a television program discussing that culture. The news on television is different from the news in a newspaper in ways that seem obvious to articulate. You see rather than read, but whose implications are still unfolding in ways I don't think anyone has fully mapped yet. When you read a newspaper, you bring pace. You read at your pace. You stop, you go back, you skip ahead.
You are an active participant in the delivery of information.
When you watch the news on television, the news brings its own pace. It arrives at the pace the broadcaster has decided. You cannot slow it down. You cannot reread. You cannot choose the order. You receive it. I am not saying this is worse. I am saying it is different. And that different is a thing worth noticing carefully rather than accepting uncritically. The image is powerful in ways the word is not. The image bypasses certain filters that the word activates. The image makes you feel before it makes you think, and the feeling, when it arrives before the thinking, can shape the thinking in ways that are not always apparent to the thinker. I watch this, and I think about what it will produce over the next decade, over the next 2. What happens to a democracy whose citizens receive their understanding of the world primarily through images that arrive at someone else's pace? I don't know the answer.
But I think the question is going to be the question.
Here is a small thing about television in 1955 that I want to include because it made me laugh, and the things that make me laugh deserve to be recorded along with the things that make me think. Marilyn Monroe. More specifically, The 7-Year Itch. The film came out this year, and there is a scene, you may have seen the photograph, the image exists as its own cultural artifact now, independent of the film, where she stands on a subway grate and her white dress billows up around her in the updraft from the train below. I watched this scene as an actress of 20 years with the specific attention of a professional observer. And what I want to tell you, what I think is important to say, because it does not get said clearly enough, is that what Marilyn Monroe does in that scene is not accidental. It is not simply a beautiful woman being beautiful. It is an extraordinarily skilled performer making choices about how to inhabit a moment that produces an effect that looks like nature and is actually art. The smile. The way she holds the dress, not fighting it, allowing it, responding to it rather than managing it. The specific quality of her laugh, which is genuinely, actually delighted, rather than performed delighted. The fact that she is in on the joke, rather than being the joke. People look at Marilyn Monroe and they see what they want to see. The surface, the image, the object of various projections. What I see is a working actress doing her job at a level of mastery that I recognize, because I have spent 20 years studying the same craft at considerably less altitude. She is very, very good. Not in spite of looking the way she looks, not separately from it,
but through the intelligent inhabiting of every physical and emotional and comic resource she has, including the one that gets the most attention, in the service of a specific artistic goal. I'm not sure she gets credit for this. I'm giving it to her now, for whatever it's worth coming from this corner table. This is the part I've been building toward. Not because the cars and the vaccine and the voice from the radio aren't real and important. They are. But because underneath all of it, underneath the chrome and the relief and the television and Marilyn Monroe's dress, there is something else happening in 1955 that I cannot describe this year without describing. There is a particular quality to the fear that runs through this year. It is not the fear of 1947. In 1947, the fear was fresh. 2 years off the end of a war, grief still raw, the specific anxiety of a world sorting itself into 2 nuclear-armed camps who were looking at each other across the rubble of everything the previous war had destroyed. That fear was present and acknowledged. It was in the newspapers. It was in the conversations. It was the thing people talked about when they talked about the shape of the world. By 1955, something has happened to that fear. It has gone underground. It hasn't diminished. If anything, it has intensified, because in 1952, the United States tested a hydrogen bomb, which is to the atomic bomb as a wildfire is to a match. And in 1953, the Soviets tested their own. Both sides now have the weapon that makes the word survival feel tentative in a way it never quite felt before. But the fear of this has been, through some collective decision that I don't think was made consciously by anyone, and was therefore made by everyone, rooted away from acknowledgement and toward management. We do not talk about it at dinner parties. We do not write newspaper columns, or if we do, they are read with a strange, glazed quality, the quality of someone reading about something too large to actually receive. We build bomb shelters in our backyards, and if you have not seen a bomb shelter, let me describe this phenomenon. American families are digging holes in their own gardens and installing concrete rooms stocked with canned goods and water and first aid kits, preparing for a nuclear attack that, if it came at the scale that anyone with access to the classified information understands it would come, would render the canned goods somewhat beside the point. But the act of building the shelter is not really about survival. It is about having something to do. It is about the specific human preference for any action over helplessness, even when the action is largely symbolic. I have a complicated relationship with this impulse. On one hand, I understand it completely, because I spent the war years doing things that were also partly symbolic. Rolling bandages, participating in scrap metal drives, doing the things that the home front was organized to do, some of which were genuinely useful, and some of which were primarily about maintaining the feeling of agency in a situation where individual agency was severely limited. On the other hand, there is something about the bomb shelter that troubles me in a way the wartime symbolic gestures didn't. The wartime gestures were public. They were shared. They were communal. They were acts of solidarity. The bomb shelter is private. It is the family retreating from the street, from the neighbors, from the shared fabric of the city or the town, into a concrete box in the backyard, with enough canned goods for 60 days. What does it say about a community that its primary response to civilizational danger is to plan to survive it alone? I don't have an answer. I have the question, which is where most of the things worth thinking about begin. I want to tell you about something that exists in New York in 1955 that I love deeply, and that I am watching with the specific affection of someone who knows that what they love is fragile. The Horn and Hard Art Automats. For anyone who doesn't know, and I suspect that some of you listening from wherever you are in your particular future don't know, an automat is a restaurant organized around vending machines. Not the kind of vending machine that will eventually dispense potato chips with a coiled wire. A serious vending machine. A wall of small glass-fronted compartments, each containing a portion of food, a slice of pie, a bowl of soup, a plate of macaroni and cheese, a sandwich, and each accessible for the deposit of a precise number of nickels. You choose what you want. You look through the glass. The food is displayed, illuminated, presented with the respect due to actual nutrition. And you put in your nickels, and the little door opens, and the food is yours. There is no waiter who looks at you. There is no maitre d' making assessments. There is no moment of negotiation between what you can afford and what the menu costs, conducted in the embarrassing semi-public, semi-private register of a restaurant, where being seen to count your money carries its own indignity. There is just you and the glass, and the nickel, and the food. I love the automat with a specific passion that I have tried several times to explain to Thomas, who finds it slightly eccentric. His position is that the food at the automat, while perfectly competent, is not exceptional, and that I could eat better for roughly the same price at any number of establishments that would treat me with equal dignity. He's right about the food. He's wrong about the dignity. Because the dignity I find at the automat is not the dignity of being treated well by a staff that has been trained to treat customers well. It is something more fundamental. It is the dignity of the transaction being entirely between me and the machine, with no human intermediary in whom the possibility of condescension, or assessment, or judgment resides. In 1947, I told you about going to bars alone as a woman, about how a woman alone at a bar is making a statement, about how the geography of the city is organized to funnel judgment toward women in certain spaces. The automat is exempt from this. At the automat on 42nd Street, which I visit once a week or so, the woman sitting alone with her macaroni and cheese and her newspaper is not a statement. She is simply a customer. The machine does not have opinions about why she's there alone. The machine's only requirement is the correct number of nickels, which she provides, and in exchange, it opens its little door and gives her what she wanted. I love this. I love it unreservedly. I also notice that the automats are getting quieter than they were. Fewer customers at certain hours. The cafeterias, which are faster and don't require nickel sorting, are drawing people away. The fast food model is beginning to appear. I won't name names, but there are hamburger establishments spreading through the outer boroughs with an efficiency and a sameness that suggests someone has looked at the restaurant industry and decided that what people want is reliability rather than choice. I think the automats will survive. I hope the automats will survive. I'm not certain the automats will survive.